Hey everyone, Josh Hawkins here. This is episode 61 of Opening Up the Gospels. In the last 8 episodes, we looked at the events in what I've called Jesus' early Galilean ministry, stretching from his return to Galilee to the calling of the 12 disciples. Jesus' fame and popularity grew tremendously, but so did his rejection among the Pharisees and the Jewish authorities. And now here we are, sometime in the spring of 28 AD, just a little over a year before Jesus is put to death in Jerusalem. There's still so many things that Jesus will say and do that I can't wait to talk about with you. The next block of time we're going to look at, I'm just calling the Middle Galilean period. The events of this period are so significant and so important as to how we understand Jesus and his first coming. Let's take a look at the chart where I break down the periods of Jesus' ministry for a second. We spent a good amount of time talking about the early Judean ministry and how it all began in Jerusalem, specifically with the cleansing of the temple. And we just walked through the events of the early Galilean ministry. And now we're going to spend some time looking at the Middle Galilean ministry. As you can see, the early Galilean ministry ends with the calling of the 12. And now the Middle Galilean period we'll see ends with the sending of the 12. We still have 3 more periods left to cover, all of which vary significantly in length. The late Galilean, the late Perean and Judean, and then Passion Week. And as we talked about back in episode 53, these 3 first periods, the early Judean, early Galilean, and Middle Galilean, they all fit within the first year of Jesus' public ministry, between the first Passover of John 2 in 27 and the second Passover of John 6 in 28 AD. It seems like this Middle Galilean period we're going to look at lasts several months and will stretch through the spring of 28. And as I mentioned before, the biggest event that all 4 Gospels record that acts as a hinge between all these periods of Jesus' ministry is the feeding of the 5,000. That event is what helps us significantly in developing a general chronology of the Gospels. Let's talk about the major themes of this Middle Galilean period for a second. The first big thing you'll notice is how Jesus' teaching is recorded a lot more, and how much deeper it is than the teaching in the early Galilean period. We'll see not only the Sermon on the Mount, but many parables that Jesus also gives. And the increase and the depth not only applies to his teaching, but the miracles as well, which we'll see surge in their magnitude. The other thing we'll see is that Jesus exclusively stays in Galilee during this period. At least that's the assumption we can make from the Gospels, because they make no mention of anything going on outside of Galilee. Jesus makes 2 significant circuits throughout the region, and then this period ends by Jesus sending out the 12. So we see Jesus purposely spreading his message to the Galileans as much as possible. The other theme we'll see is how tension continues to mount between Jesus and the Jews. Remember the theme of division? That's a huge theme of Jesus' ministry. Well, I set the foundation for that back in episode 36, 37, and 38 when I talked about the message of John the Baptist. Throughout this Middle Galilean period, we'll see the tension mounting so that in later periods, the theme of division comes forth even more than before. As we're looking through the details of these scenes, we can't lose sight of who Jesus is and the overarching grand mission that he came for. Remember, through his miracles and through his teaching, he's seeking a righteous remnant of Israel who would bear the fruits of repentance and who wouldn't trust in their ethnicity to give them inheritance in the promises that God made to Abraham. Again, just as John the Baptist said, Jesus is the very God of Israel, and his coming would divide between the wheat and the chaff, between the stump and the tree. And one of the first ways we see Jesus doing this in the Middle Galilean period is through the Sermon on the Mount. In context, what Jesus is teaching is extremely divisive. Remember the context. There's so many Jews in Israel thinking that they're the ones that are going to inherit the coming kingdom simply because of their ethnic descent from Abraham. Jesus comes in the Sermon on the Mount opening up with the Beatitudes, and he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom." Now, when we understand the larger context of Jesus' mission, what he is saying there is so divisive. We'll talk much more about the Sermon on the Mount, but suffice it to say now that through the Sermon on the Mount and through this period, Jesus is simply clarifying even more who is the true seed of Abraham and who was not. Something else we'll see in this period is Jesus training the 12. We see them kind of going wherever Jesus goes and being apprised and being connected with everything that Jesus said and did. Their rigorous training culminates in them being sent out with power to appeal to the people. They go out with the same message as John the Baptist. The same thing he said, that Israel's urgent repentance was required if they wanted to inherit the promises that God had made. Through this period, we can see that God was having mercy on Galilee, seeking their repentance time and time and time again. I want to take a minute and talk about how the Gospels themselves narrate this portion of Jesus' ministry. First, we see Matthew's Gospel continuing thematically, though he occasionally moves in chronological order through some of the events. Of course, the most significant thing that I've already mentioned in a past episode before is how Matthew places the Sermon on the Mount in the early chapters of his Gospel near the start of Jesus' public ministry. Again, when we remember that Matthew is being thematic and not chronological, we can better appreciate the timing of the Sermon on the Mount in a way that the other Gospels place it. As I mentioned in episode 7, Matthew has arranged his gospel in sections of narrative and discourse. Luke is the one who narrates the Sermon on the Mount chronologically, and more broadly, Luke narrates this entire Middle Galilean section chronologically. Luke also includes more of Jesus' teaching and a few more scenes during this section than Mark does. Now, John's gospel doesn't record any of the events of this period at all. Like I talked about back in episode 10, John is filling in the gaps of the things that Mark and Luke don't narrate. And now looking at our map briefly, John mostly focuses on the events in the south in Jerusalem and Judea. So the events we'll be looking at in this Middle Galilean period, of course, all take place up in Galilee, so that they fit between John 5 and John 6. In John 5, we see Jesus in Jerusalem for the Feast of Wood Offering. And then in John 6, we see Jesus in Jerusalem again for the Passover feast. Just remembering what John is doing in his gospel has helped me get a much clearer picture of the chronology of the Gospels in general. So let's take a look at an overview of the events in this period. These things span just a few chapters in Luke's Gospel. We ended the last period with the calling of the 12, and so now we're going to see the Sermon on the Mount, followed by the healing of the centurion's servant, and then the raising of the widow's son in Nain, and then the third circuit throughout Galilee, and then Jesus' words about John the Baptist, and then the sinful woman at Jesus' feet, and then Jesus' return to Capernaum, and then the encounter with his mother and his brothers, and then a whole slew of Jesus teaching in parables, and then Jesus calming the storm, and the deliverance of a demonized man in the region of the Gerasenes, and then Jesus returning to Capernaum where he heals Jairus' daughter, and the woman with the issue of blood, and then Jesus leaving Capernaum and then completing a fourth circuit throughout Galilee, and then Jesus being rejected a second time in Nazareth, and then we end this period with the sending of the 12. In the next several episodes, we'll work through the Sermon on the Mount together. The words of Jesus in Matthew 5 through 7 are probably some of the most well-known passages in Jesus' teachings. So I want to spend some time on it and bring a little bit of a different perspective on it that's not quite as well known. In the meantime, you can go back and check out some of the past episodes in this series on my website, www.joshuahawkins.com/gospels. You can also sign up there for short email notifications for when a new episode is released. Well, God bless you, and I hope to see you next time.